It was a morning like any other. The sun rose slowly, casting a warm glow across the Earth's surface. The world awoke to the hum of everyday life, cars speeding down roads, people rushing to their jobs, children laughing as they played in the streets. But then, without warning, something changed at first. It was a subtle shift, a faint tremor in the air, a feeling of unease creeping over the land, and then the sky darkened, as if a great shadow had fallen across the planet. The first signs of something amiss appeared on radar screens across the world. Military stations detected large objects moving at incredible speed toward Earth. These objects were massive, far larger than any ship or satellite humans had ever constructed. The world's leaders were notified immediately, but no one had any explanation for what they were or where they had come from. The unknown vessels seemed to appear out of nowhere, traveling through space at an impossible rate of speed, their trajectories set for Earth with no indication of stopping. As the ships neared the Earth, they began to slow their descent with a precision that baffled scientists and military experts alike. The objects hovered above the planet's surface, as if waiting for something. There was no communication, no signal sent to Earth, just the eerie silence of their presence. The ships did not engage in any form of attack. They simply loomed in the sky like giants from another world. Governments around the globe went into emergency mode in the blink of an eye. The United Nations convened a summit to discuss what was happening. World leaders watched the skies nervously. Military forces were mobilized as nations prepared for the worst, while civilians stared upward in fear. The ships moved closer to Earth's atmosphere, each one a massive metallic structure, reflecting the sunlight in strange patterns. Their sheer size and unyielding presence filled the hearts of all with dread. The silence from above was unsettling. It stretched on for hours, then days. No one knew what the ships wanted or why they had come. The ships seemed to be waiting for something, but no one knew what it was. Humanity stood on the edge of a precipice, staring into the unknown. A sense of helplessness spread through every country as the entire world held its breath, wondering what would come next. Scientists began to scramble for answers. They used every resource available to try and decipher the ship's technology, but their efforts proved futile. The technology was unlike anything known to mankind. It was far more advanced than anything Earth had ever encountered. Their sensors could not penetrate the ships to analyze their structure, and any attempts to communicate were met with silence, as if the ships were completely impervious to all human efforts. The clock ticked on, and still nothing happened. The ships hovered motionless in the sky, their presence unyielding. The world watched in confusion and fear, desperate for answers. Every news outlet broadcast the same images again and again, the vast ships hanging in the air, as if mocking humanity's helplessness. People gathered in the streets, staring at the sky, whispering among themselves, wondering if this was the beginning of something catastrophic, or if it was merely an elaborate hoax that would eventually fade away. But as the days passed and the ships remained unmoving in the sky, it became clear that this was not a hoax. The reality was undeniable, and humanity was left to wonder what the arrival of these unknown visitors truly meant and why they had chosen Earth. Days passed without a single change. The ships still hovered silently in the sky, their presence a constant reminder of humanity's vulnerability. Governments around the world scrambled to react with no clear direction or plan of action. The usual order of things seemed to dissolve as nations set aside their differences and unified in the face of the unknown. Military forces from every corner of the globe were put on high alert. Every available asset was mobilized. Air forces took to the skies. Radar stations blared warnings at every hour, but nothing came from the ships above. No attack, no communication, just the heavy silence that grew more oppressive with each passing moment. The uncertainty became unbearable as people looked up at the ships, not knowing if they would remain passive or suddenly unleash destruction without warning. The silence seemed like a promise of something worse, and the world held its breath, waiting for the next move. Every city seemed to feel the weight of those ships hanging above them like a storm that never broke. Scientists continued their attempts to communicate, but their efforts were futile. The ships emitted no signals, no signs of life, no indication of their purpose. The aliens, if they were aliens, seemed to be entirely uninterested in interacting with humanity. Global leaders met in emergency summits trying to piece together some form of strategy, but there were no answers to be found. Every decision felt like a gamble. Every option seemed like it might lead to disaster. Even the most advanced military forces in the world stood powerless against the unknown technology of the ships. Each passing day seemed to bring more fear as the realization sank in that humanity was facing something far beyond its understanding. Governments began to issue orders to prepare for the worst, to dig in and wait for any sign of aggression. Meanwhile, ordinary people across the world reacted in various ways. Some turned to religion, hoping for a divine answer. Some sought shelter, hiding indoors, unable to cope with the anxiety that gripped the globe. Others turned their fear into curiosity and took to the streets to gather with others to talk about what could be happening. Every corner of the world seemed to have its own theory, its own idea of what the ships meant. Some believed they were a sign of an invasion. Others hoped that this was simply a peaceful encounter from an advanced race willing to share their knowledge. But the fear that ran through the veins of Earth's population could not be denied. It was as though everyone knew that nothing about this situation was normal, nothing about the ships was comforting. Then came the first major breakthrough. A group of military intelligence officers working around the clock discovered something strange in the ship's movements. While the ships did not move in a traditional sense, they did shift slightly, as if positioning themselves, as though preparing for something. Their movements were deliberate, though unexplainable. It was the first sign that perhaps these ships were not entirely dormant. Maybe they were waiting for something or someone, but what that something was remained a mystery. Amid the panic and confusion, one thought echoed in the minds of the world's leaders. What did these ships want? And how much longer could Earth's fragile peace last before it was shattered forever? The silence continued hanging over humanity like a storm cloud as the world waited for the unknown to make its next move. The silence that had gripped the world for days was finally broken on the fifth morning since the ships had appeared. It started with a sudden pulse of energy that resonated across every communication channel on Earth. Television, radio, internet, even the most secure military frequencies. The pulse lasted for only a moment, but the message it carried was clear and unambiguous. A voice echoed across the planet, not in one language, but in every language, every dialect known to humankind, and in every tone imaginable. It was as if the voice was directly speaking into each person's mind, bypassing all barriers of communication. The voice was calm but carried an undeniable weight as it began to speak. We are the Kaldor. We have come to claim what is ours. For a moment, the world held its collective breath. No one dared to move, to speak, to react. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible in their implications. The Kaldor. No one had ever heard of such a species, yet the weight of their tone suggested that their arrival was no accident. The ships above Earth, the unshakable presence in the sky, had not been a passive observation. They had been waiting for something, and now they had spoken. We seek an artifact, the voice continued. It lies buried deep within your planet, a relic of unimaginable power. We demand its surrender. Do not attempt to hide it or destroy it. We know where it is, and we will take it by force if necessary. The implications of these words spread like wildfire. What artifact? And why Earth? There was no record of any such powerful relic buried within the planet. No ancient texts, no myths, no clues in the annals of Earth's history that pointed to such an object. And yet the Kaldor claimed to know of it. Better yet, they claimed to know its location. It was impossible to ignore the chilling certainty in their voice. The voice continued, but this time it carried a threat that made every government and military power on Earth sit up in full attention. Refuse, and your world will be destroyed. Comply, and you will be spared. You have 48 hours to make your decision. Do not test our patience. With that, the voice fell silent, and the pulse of energy that had preceded it vanished. For several minutes, there was nothing but confusion and fear. The world had just received a declaration from an unknown alien race, one with the power to obliterate humanity if its demands were not met. The 48-hour deadline loomed like a countdown to a disaster that no one could fully comprehend. Panic began to spread in the streets as governments scrambled to assess the situation. The United Nations convened an emergency session, bringing together world leaders in a desperate attempt to formulate a response. The military powers of the world were thrust into high alert, ready for anything. But there were no plans, no strategies in place to deal with such a sudden and overwhelming encounter. The entire world was left grappling with a single, terrifying question. Could humanity give up the relic they knew nothing about? Or would they risk fighting an enemy capable of destroying them without a second thought? Meanwhile, a handful of scientists, historians, and archaeologists tried to make sense of the Kaldor's words. They scoured ancient texts, combed through historical records, and delved into myths and legends. And then, like a flicker of light in the darkness, a possibility began to form. Could the Kaldor be referring to something buried deep in Earth's ancient past? Something no one had discovered, or perhaps something deliberately hidden for reasons unknown. As the hours ticked away, uncertainty filled the air. The world waited, and the Kaldor, above, waited as well. In the wake of the Kaldor's chilling message, a sense of urgency swept across the globe. Governments, desperate to understand what the aliens were referring to, mobilized every resource at their disposal. Scientists, archaeologists, and historians were brought in from every country to search for clues that might explain the mysterious relic the Kaldor had mentioned. But there was one fundamental problem. There was no record of any such object in humanity's history, and no one could even begin to fathom what the Kaldor could be talking about. For days, the world's greatest minds pored over ancient texts and relics, diving into the obscure corners of human history in search of something that would shed light on the Kaldor's cryptic demand. It seemed impossible. But just as panic began to mount and hope seemed to fade, one breakthrough emerged from the dust of forgotten history. An obscure archaeologist named Dr. Mira Tanaka, working in a remote part of the Amazon rainforest, discovered something that would change the course of human history. Tanaka's team, digging through the ruins of an ancient civilization long thought to be lost, uncovered a hidden chamber deep within a crumbled temple. The chamber was filled with strange symbols that matched those found in a series of ancient cave paintings discovered decades earlier in an entirely different part of the world. But it was the object lying in the center of the chamber that caused Tanaka's heart to race. A relic buried beneath layers of stone and time, glowing faintly with an energy unlike anything she had ever encountered. The relic was like no other artifact ever discovered. It was a sphere, smooth and metallic, but unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Its surface seemed to ripple, shifting colors like a living thing. When Tanaka touched it, the sphere hummed with an energy that reverberated through her entire being. It was as if the object itself was aware of her, responding to her presence. The relic seemed to pulse with an ancient power, one that hinted at the kind of technology that could bend the very fabric of reality. The significance of the discovery was immediately clear to Tanaka. This was the artifact the Kaldor had been referring to. It was no ordinary relic. It was a key to something far more ancient, far more powerful. The energy emanating from it was unlike anything on Earth. It was clear that this object had been placed there by a civilization far beyond anything humanity could comprehend. But what was even more unsettling was the realization that the Kaldor had known about this artifact all along. Tanaka quickly alerted the world's leaders and scientists to her discovery, and the information was immediately relayed to the United Nations. The news spread like wildfire. Earth had found the relic, the one the Kaldor had demanded, but with it came an even more disturbing truth. The relic was far more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. Its potential was unfathomable, and its purpose was unclear. The implications were staggering. The Kaldor weren't just interested in any artifact. They had come for a weapon of unimaginable power, one that could give them control over not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. But what was the relic's true purpose? Was it a weapon, a tool for domination, or something even more dangerous? In the days that followed, a new question arose. If the Kaldor truly knew the relic's location, then why had they not simply taken it? Why had they given humanity a choice, surrender or face destruction? Was it possible they feared the relic's true power just as much as they sought to possess it? As tensions continued to rise, the world's leaders were faced with an impossible decision: surrender the relic and hope the Kaldor would keep their word, or fight for it and risk the annihilation of everything humanity had ever known. The discovery of the relic had changed everything, but it had also opened a door to far more questions, ones that humanity had no answers for. The world was on the brink of a new and terrifying reality, and the future was no longer in its hands. The discovery of the relic plunged the world into chaos. Humanity now faced an impossible choice: surrender the artifact to the Kaldor or fight to keep it and risk total destruction. The world's governments convened emergency sessions to discuss their next move, but the lines between allies and adversaries blurred. The uncertainty that had already taken hold of the global population deepened as people began to fear the consequences of whatever decision would be made. In the halls of power, the debate raged. On one side were those who advocated for giving the Kaldor the relic, believing that the aliens' promise of sparing Earth would hold true. These leaders argued that the destruction of the planet was an unacceptable risk. The relic's power was too great for humanity to understand, let alone control, and they feared that attempting to keep it could trigger an overwhelming alien response. They urged the world to comply with the Kaldor's demands, reasoning that Earth's survival was more important than any object buried beneath the surface for millennia. On the other side were those who saw the Kaldor as invaders who could not be trusted. These leaders believed that humanity's potential, once revealed, could rival any alien force. The relic, they argued, was not just a tool for destruction, it was the key to Earth's future. By giving it up, they would be condemning humankind to eternal subjugation, turning the Earth into a backwater in the eyes of the galaxy. Humanity had fought too long and hard to rise from its primitive beginnings only to surrender to an alien species. The debate was not limited to politicians. Military leaders pushed their own agendas, concerned that the Kaldor might already be positioning themselves for a military strike once the deadline expired. The secrecy surrounding the Kaldor's intentions bred suspicion among Earth's armed forces. Some believed the aliens might simply want to weaken Earth's defenses before striking a final blow, while others warned that the Kaldor could unleash an attack at any moment. There would be no time to mount an effective counteroffensive once they took action. As the diplomatic impasse deepened, small factions of scientists and researchers began to look for another way forward. Dr. Mira Tanaka, who had discovered the relic, continued to study its enigmatic properties in secret. She and her team believed that the artifact held more than just raw power. They theorized that it could be activated in a way that would disrupt the Kaldor's technology, perhaps even giving humanity the upper hand. But activating the relic was dangerous, and none of them knew the full extent of what might happen if they tampered with it. Tanaka's discoveries were shared with a select group of military leaders who grew increasingly concerned that they had no way of defending the Earth if the Kaldor chose to attack. Earth's most advanced weapons were no match for the alien fleet. Desperation drove a secret plan to form, a plan to secretly retrieve the relic and harness its power, but without the Kaldor's knowledge. The goal was clear: find a way to activate the relic and use its energy as a weapon against the invaders before they could strike. But even as Tanaka and the military strategists worked behind the scenes, the clock continued ticking down. With each passing hour, the threat of alien retaliation grew closer. The Kaldor's deadline of 48 hours was rapidly approaching, and humanity was no closer to a consensus than it had been in the beginning. Some governments began to consider a plan to evacuate Earth's population to underground bunkers, a desperate hope that they could survive the fallout, while others began quietly preparing their forces for an all-out war. The world was divided, and every decision felt like a gamble. Would humanity give up the relic, accepting the Kaldor's terms in the hopes of survival, or would they risk everything to fight for their future? The weight of the decision was unbearable, and the specter of the alien fleet above them loomed larger with every passing minute. The silence of the last few days had been broken, and now it was time for Earth to choose its path forward. The galaxy and Earth's place in it hung in the balance. As the clock ticked toward the Kaldor's ultimatum, the world stood on the precipice of a decision that would define humanity's future. Governments had fractured along ideological lines, and military leaders, desperate for a way to protect their nations, turned to the one thing they believed might give them an edge: the relic. Dr. Mira Tanaka's discovery had ignited a new urgency. The relic was not just a symbol of power, it was humanity's last hope. But it was more than just an artifact. It was a key that could unlock something far greater. And now, it was at the center of a desperate race to harness its potential. Tanaka's research had uncovered a startling truth. The relic was not only powerful, it was also capable of reacting to certain energy frequencies, which might allow it to be activated or even controlled. The task at hand was no longer just about protecting the relic. It was about finding a way to unlock its secrets before the Kaldor did. To that end, a clandestine operation was put into motion, one that would risk everything to retrieve the relic and understand how it could be used. A special task force, known only to a select few, was formed under the direct command of the United Nations and several key military powers. The operation was shrouded in secrecy, and its details were kept from the public. Soldiers, scientists, and engineers from various countries were assembled in a highly coordinated effort to locate the hidden chamber, where the relic was kept, and study it with the full resources of Earth's best minds. The location of the relic, deep within the Amazon rainforest, had become a focal point for the operation. While the Kaldor's ships hovered above, showing no sign of aggression, the task force moved in quietly, knowing that every second counted. Hidden from prying eyes, a fleet of military transports descended on the rainforest, bringing with them the personnel and equipment necessary to retrieve the relic. Despite the urgency, the task force moved with calculated precision. Speed was essential, but so was caution. The Kaldor had not yet moved to seize the artifact, but Earth had no illusions that the aliens would wait forever. As the operation unfolded in the Amazon, Tanaka worked tirelessly with a team of researchers and engineers to crack the puzzle of the relic's power. She was the only one who had physically touched it and felt its energy firsthand. In her mind, she could still feel the hum of the relic, the way it seemed to react to her presence, as if it recognized her touch. It was as though the artifact had been waiting for something or someone to awaken it. The energy it emanated was unlike anything known to Earth. It was not merely advanced technology. It was something more, something alive, and it terrified her. In parallel with Tanaka's efforts, Earth's military forces combed through every piece of data collected on the Kaldor ships. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, impossible to penetrate, impossible to understand. But the one thing humanity had learned through all their attempts to communicate with the Kaldor was that the aliens were not invulnerable. The Kaldor fleet had been on Earth's doorstep for days without taking any direct action. They were waiting, biding their time. And with the relic in their grasp, humanity had one last chance to turn the tide. As the task force entered the jungle, it became clear that there was no room for failure. The pressure to succeed was immense, but the task force had no choice. Earth's survival hung in the balance. As they advanced through the dense undergrowth toward the location where Tanaka had made her discovery, the team felt the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. Every step forward brought them closer to the relic, but also closer to the terrifying reality that the Kaldor might strike at any moment. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet shook, a tremor that sent ripples through the air. The Kaldor had made their first move. Their ships, hovering silently above, had begun to descend. The deadline had arrived. The clock was ticking, and humanity's fate rested on a knife's edge. The tremor beneath their feet rattled through the dense jungle, a violent reminder that time was running out. The task force, caught in the chaos of both the shifting ground and the looming threat from above, scrambled into position. Their mission was clear: retrieve the relic and ensure it didn't fall into the hands of the Kaldor. But as the ground continued to shake, a deep, unnatural hum began to rise from the jungle floor. The relic was reacting. Somehow, the vibrations from the alien ships seemed to trigger it, and the strange energy that had pulsed within it flared to life. Dr. Mira Tanaka, leading the team, was the first to recognize what was happening. The relic's energy was awakening, responding to something, perhaps the Kaldor's presence, or perhaps the proximity of its removal. As the energy built, a powerful wave of force radiated outward from the chamber. The air around them crackled, heavy with an electric charge that made their skin tingle. Tanaka could hear the hum of the relic growing louder, resonating with a strange harmonic frequency. "Get to the chamber now," she shouted over the comms, her voice urgent and strained. Her team, fully aware of the stakes, pushed forward through the dense undergrowth, their weapons raised in anticipation of danger. But even as they neared the hidden chamber, Tanaka couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond the relic itself was being stirred. Something ancient, something that had been dormant for eons. The entrance to the chamber was barely visible through the thick vines and moss that had overtaken it. Yet, as they approached, the ground seemed to shift again, the relic's power warping the very environment around them. The air grew thick and hot, and the energy emitted from the artifact became almost tangible, filling the air like static electricity. The team reached the entrance, their flashlights illuminating the crumbled stonework. In the center, resting untouched for millennia, lay the relic, a pulsating orb of metal and light. "We need to move it now," Tanaka urged as she reached out toward it, her hand trembling. The moment she made contact with the relic, the humming grew deafening. A sudden burst of energy surged through her, and for a moment, Tanaka's vision blurred. Her entire body felt as though it had been submerged in raw, unfiltered power. She saw flashes of distant stars, alien landscapes, and ancient cities. A torrent of knowledge and images flooded her mind. Then, just as quickly, it stopped. The relic had revealed something terrifying. A voice, not unlike the Kaldor's, filled her mind, but it was different this time. It wasn't a demand. It was a warning. "The power you awaken is not yours to control. The relic's true function is beyond your comprehension. It is a force that bends the fabric of reality itself. Should it be used in haste, it will destroy everything in its path, including your world." Tanaka staggered back, her hand still hovering above the relic, her mind reeling from the visions that had assaulted her. The relic wasn't just a weapon. It was something much older, far more dangerous. And yet she couldn't help but wonder, had the Kaldor known this all along? Had they hoped to unlock this power themselves? The Kaldor ships had now fully descended into the atmosphere, their immense shadows blocking out the sun. They were here, no longer waiting. They began to release smaller craft, drones, and landing ships, all silently preparing to secure the relic. The deadline had expired, and the Kaldor were ready to take what they had come for, by force if necessary. Tanaka's heart raced as she quickly recalculated their options. There was no time left for caution. The relic was far too powerful to be handed over without understanding its full potential. She could already hear the hum of the Kaldor's fleet above, their massive ships now circling, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. "Activate it," Tanaka ordered, her voice resolute. Her team had no choice but to follow her command. They had uncovered the relic's power, and now it was time to unleash it. But the question loomed over them. What would happen when the relic's true potential was awakened? Could humanity harness its force, or would the attempt tear their world apart? With one final glance at the relic, Tanaka stepped forward and initiated the activation sequence. The future of Earth rested in her hands, and as the energy within the chamber exploded outward, the world would never be the same again. As the activation sequence triggered, a deafening roar of energy erupted from the relic. The chamber was engulfed in a blinding flash of light, and the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. Tanaka and her team were thrown to the ground as the energy wave surged outward, shattering the stone walls of the chamber and sending debris flying into the dense jungle. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. The very air was alive with crackling power, a force so intense that it seemed to distort time and space. The Kaldor ships hovering above Earth responded immediately. The moment the relic's energy ignited, the alien fleet's ships began to shift, their glowing engines flaring as they started to descend rapidly toward the surface. The countdown had ended, and the Kaldor were no longer patient. They had come for the relic, and they intended to take it by force if necessary. Tanaka scrambled to her feet, dazed but determined. She could feel the power of the relic coursing through the chamber, and she knew it was no longer just a tool. It had become a weapon. Her team was already moving, securing the relic and preparing for the next step. But even as they worked, a terrible realization struck her. The energy from the relic wasn't just responding to their activation. It was also altering the very fabric of the planet's atmosphere. The Kaldor might have underestimated the relic's full power, but humanity's attempt to control it had triggered something even greater than anyone could have imagined. "Get the relic out of here," Tanaka shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "We need to leave now." But before they could make it back to the transport, the skies above the jungle darkened with a terrible energy. The Kaldor had arrived. The first of their ships descended rapidly, its massive form casting a long shadow over the jungle. Dozens of smaller craft followed, landing in the clearing nearby. The Kaldor were no longer waiting for Earth to make its decision. They had come to take what they believed was theirs. The ground around them began to shake again as their advanced technology deployed, sending waves of force toward the task force. Tanaka knew they couldn't fight them. Not now, not with the relic in their hands. The Kaldor had superior firepower, and their ships were virtually impervious to any of humanity's weapons. The only chance they had was to use the relic's power before it could fall into the hands of the invaders. The energy swirling around the chamber was becoming unstable, and Tanaka realized that the only way to survive this moment was to let the relic do what it was destined to do. She gave the order, "Activate the containment field. We need to send it back to where it came from." The task force's engineers scrambled to engage the activation sequence, hoping to open a rift that would send the relic, and all of its destructive power, somewhere far beyond Earth. They didn't know where it would go or what it would do, but Tanaka had no other choice. The relic was too dangerous to stay on Earth, and it was humanity's only chance to prevent a catastrophic conflict. As the containment field powered up, the sky above the jungle erupted with a deafening roar. The Kaldor ships advanced, weapons primed, but it was too late. The energy field enveloped the relic, and with a violent flash, the relic vanished from the chamber in an instant. The Kaldor were left with nothing but an empty space where it had once been. The ground shook one final time as the alien ships hesitated, then suddenly reversed their course, retreating back into the sky. The fleet had received an order, and with the relic gone, they had no reason to continue their assault. Tanaka and her team stood in stunned silence as the sky above cleared. The relic had disappeared, and the Kaldor had been forced to leave Earth without it. It was the first victory humanity had experienced since the invasion began, but it came at a great cost. As the task force regrouped, Tanaka looked up at the sky, her heart heavy with both relief and sorrow. The Kaldor had been repelled, for now, but the relic, that powerful and mysterious object, was gone. And with it, so too was the knowledge of what it could truly do. Humanity had survived, but the truth was clear. Earth was no longer the same. The galaxy had taken notice of the human race, and whether the Kaldor would return or other, more dangerous forces would emerge, one thing was certain. The age of silence had ended. A new chapter had begun, and the reckoning had only just begun.